So hello everyone, for those who are with us this afternoon. We have today with us Mark Oviatt. I'm very happy that he accepted our invitation to speak to us today. He's a former IBEI student, and I mean, this is something that is really happy always. I mean, I'm very happy to to have him here because he's like, well, coming back home, right, Mark? So
Yeah.
So yeah, as we discussed some weeks ago when we were planning this event. So today's session is basically devoted to the work that Mark has done. Mark has extensive, broad international experience in development. He has focused on validated, prioritized, and consensus sanctioned needs assessment, practical program design, and solicitation proposal development. He has worked for USAID, the USAID Development Agency, for several decades, and actually his first direct work with USAID began in Iraq in 2003 when he was placed in charge of restoring, refurbishing, and rebuilding all of Iraq's water and sanitation systems. After this post, Mark moved to Afghanistan with the USAID, where he led training and marketing programs with farmers in the agricultural sector. Mark also lived in Sri Lanka, where he worked on USAID's programs for return internally displaced persons, former combatants, widows, and victims of conflict. Afterwards, he took another position as the principal officer for USAID in Guyana and Suriname. And Mark is currently semi-retired, taking a USAID short-term technical assistance assignments. Mark has an educational background in political science. As I said, he's also an IBEI alumni in the master program on international relations. Again, Mark, I would like to give you a very warm welcome to today's session, and the floor is yours.
Well, I guess I'm going to insult pretty much everybody right off the bat, right at the very front here. I'm a cigarette smoker, so I talk and I hold a cigarette, not necessarily smoke it. So I'm sorry for those of you. I'm really glad to see that you all on my screen are attending IBEI. It was one of the best adventures I ever had, besides working as a waiter, where I got to learn about people pretty darn quickly. And that's when I was studying at 3 other universities before IBEI. I don't want to bore you, and I know that questions and answers come along at the end of this spiel that I'm going to make with you all, but I would really welcome just let me know, raise your hand, or do whatever you do on this application. Just let me know, or just interrupt me or stop me and say, hey, I have a question, please. I was told that you all want to learn about development aid, humanitarian assistance, and getting a job after you finish your studies. That's about, well, what Juan Carlos gave me as far as information. At least that's what I took away from his instructions. USAID, if you're interested in USAID, and this can kind of apply to the Peace Corps, which is another version of assistance, development, and humanitarian. USAID is an offshoot, is the precursor to the Marshall Plan, which was started in World War II to restore all of Europe. So a lot of the buildings that were damaged and infrastructure, schools, you name it, were all rebuilt with funding from the United States under the Marshall Plan. That was 1947 when they started. In 1949, after a lot of work was already done, they kind of changed the name to the International Development Agency, IDA. And that went up until 1961, when John F. Kennedy, the president then, established and approved an agency called United States Agency for International Development, USAID. It's worldwide. It operates in 80 plus countries out of 193, 195. It became an adjunct to foreign policy in the late 60s, where U.S. government and the Cold War and all of that stuff started taking over kind of the areas of focus that this development agency would support. And that was in the 70s. They went to food, nutrition, population planning, health, education, human resources. In the 80s, free market, capitalism, basically. And they started including private voluntary organizations and shifted from individual projects to large programs. Back in the 60s, the early 60s, my dad worked for IDA, International Development Agency, and built friendship highways in Vietnam and Thailand, which are still being sustained and used. They were originally just farm to market roads, and farmers were losing about 80% of their product on their way to Bangkok to sell those goods. And so anyway, USAID decided that's a need that we need to meet, and they built these highways. And people still know my dad's name, and this is, my God, 60 plus years ago. And the roads are going to bring up a couple of other topics that I'll discuss a little bit later on about sustainability and ownership. In the 90s, countries received integrated packages of assistance, quality of life, basically sustainable development, and USAID really started using a lot of NGOs, non-governmental organizations. And then I came into the picture quite by accident. I was raised overseas because my dad worked for USAID, and we moved every 3-4 years. I learned 6 languages thanks to USAID. I went to the best boarding schools in the world thanks to USAID, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, USAID is, if you are an adventurous type, like I am apparently, and a team player, a team maker, and a field-oriented person, that you're in the front lines, then USAID is for you. Ditto for the Peace Corps. A couple of my former classmates followed my recommendations to get a job with Peace Corps. By the way, he was an American U.S. citizen. And went from there to USAID. It's kind of the track in the way they move. And you're wondering, does USAID hire only Americans? No. Right now, there is a big move for supporting FSNs, Foreign Service Nationals. That means, like in Sri Lanka, my USAID office had 85% local staff and third country nationals, TCNs, who were shipped from other countries where they were working to new locations. That is exploding right now within USAID. They've realized that that is a much better cohesion of effort, knowledge of the local cultures, and effectiveness, quite honestly. I did the projects in Iraq. Later on, I actually worked for the UN in Afghanistan, but The largest donor was USAID. That was $625 million. Iraq was $2.2 billion in 3 years. I won't get into the accomplishments, but it was a hell of a great impact on everybody, the locals, on the standard of living. The biggest, and I'm saying this frankly, part of the problem with most countries, especially Western countries, when they're trying to do assistance programs, believe that every country needs to be democratic or be driven into democracies. And Afghanistan was a good example in that it's 34 provinces with as many warlords or more in that country. And they need to realize that you're not going to bring a 17th, 18th century country into the 20th century in 2 weeks, even 2 years, possibly 20 years. Somebody who really excelled at getting that done was Kemal Atatürk back in the 30s in Turkey, changing the language and alphabet and women's rights, etc. He did an amazing job. I had a portrait of him in every house that I've lived in, literally, in my office, just saying it can be done. There is localization, is flavor of the year, and basically that is getting back to what I used to do more directly, and that is knowledge of the field. I visited 34 provinces in Afghanistan. I flew all over Iraq to find out what are the needs assessments, because the prior needs assessments were done by the Army Corps of Engineers, a group of engineers that never leave their little cubicle in Washington, D.C., and say, oh, we need to do this, we need to do that, but they've never been out in the field to talk with the villagers to find out what the hell do you need? What would be good for you? We talked about ownership, or I did, about ownership and sustainability. In Iraq, I restored all of the water treatment, sewage, drinking water, along with roads, bridges, clinics, schools, airports, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I noticed quickly that all of the technical people that could sustain these developments had left the country for neighboring countries. How would they sustain these multi-billion-dollar projects? And one project that was really sustained well was bringing drinking water supplies or sources to approximately 600 plus villages in Iraq. And while I was doing that project, I found out that the maternal infant mortality rates were just the highest, literally, in the world. And I included United Nations Health to accompany me to these villages, and they gave lessons, training to the mothers and the families on how to take care of themselves, wash your breast before feeding your baby, sanitize, basically. And we reduced infant mortality and maternal mortality rates by 50% in 3 years. That's millions that are still living today because of that one little project. But then it started out with water supply. And how do you keep a water supply program functioning and sustainable? And I didn't have any money to do training or anything else. And so each village has its own warlord, its own sheikh. And you put them in charge of supplying water to their families around the village for $1 a year, $2 a month, whatever. And he would make money out of it so he could maintain the equipment that distributed water. And that today is still functioning, putting somebody in charge of that. And it's perhaps a mix of politics, capitalism, and other stuff. But at least they've got water. Before, women had to walk an average of 5 kilometers with buckets to go get drinking water for their families. That was a long distance to carry 5-gallon water pails. Anyway, so much for ownership. The village owned that water supply, sustained by that village and its leader. Right now, with what's going on in Uzbekistan, there is a focus, obviously, on what we call a CPC, Critical Priority Country. Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, parts of Sudan, Yemen, et cetera, are CPCs. And these countries have focus on them. If you go to USAID's site and you ask about project expense or finance or whatever, you'll see which countries are getting the most money. Egypt is along one of them. Latin America, due to the immigration of so many folks, is getting economic growth programs established in southern Mexico states, Chiapas, etc. One of my friends from the UN was just here recently, heading down to look for investment opportunities to help coffee growers, because Chiapas has great coffee. How do you make money on an investment in a country that's not known very well for good economics these days, or any country for that matter? Ditto for projects like Power Africa. The same thing again. I mean, that was a very slow start because you couldn't find investors that were sure that people could afford to pay for electricity. And a focus was found that lowered the cost but increased the market so that they could get their money back out of these investments. USAID just celebrated its 60th anniversary. It's gone through one hell of a lot of presidential administrations, cabinets, congressmen, and a variant of world needs. For me, I was kind of not the run-of-the-mill type of guy, because I would get out in the field and see firsthand what the need was and discuss that with the local potential beneficiaries. We did public-private alliance projects where we would invest 20, 30, 40, 45% of an investment, a private company, like in Sri Lanka, the largest manufacturer of Nike clothing, shoes, etc. We did a partnership with them, and they opened up manufacturing facilities, tailor shops, big ones, to employ the Tamils who had been in a civil war for 26 years. They had no incomes. We also had other partners that were just not doing a good job at all and pocketing the money that we gave them and not really helping anybody at all except themselves. So that required that you be out in the field. It's the frontline people. I mean, when I worked as a waiter, I learned quickly that waiter was the moneymaker for the restaurant owners and managers. And that has not changed to this day. It's still the waiters, the servers, the people that get out and talk to potential beneficiaries to learn what the needs are. Current focus, climate change, democratic values, irregular migration. This is what USAID is saying. Global health leadership, humanitarian assistance, economic growth, resilience, security, and advanced peace. We have, I won't estimate here in public, but we have a lot of Uzbek nationals working for USAID in secret all over the country. And through them, we find out what's happening in the field and what the needs are. USAID employs approximately 9,000 plus staff. It's based in Washington, D.C. at the Ronald Reagan Building. There are approximately 1,800 employees internationally scattered throughout the 80 missions plus. My friends at the USAID Alumni Association in Washington, D.C., it's UAA. You might want to Google it and see what those of us alums are doing. Made suggestions to what I'm telling you. And I would say that the most important thing is being open to adventure, being open to focusing on needs and needs assessments from your own feet, your own steps. I don't want to scare you away from working for USAID because you're not an American citizen. You can still get a security clearance. You can work. Matter of fact, we have FSNs and TCNs working in Washington, D.C. office, headquarters. Being a Foreign Service officer requires that you be adventurous, that you be open, that you be a completely super team player supporter. And if there's a country that you'd like to work in, check the embassy and the U.S. Embassy and the USAID website to see what they're hiring for. Try to set up a meeting with a human resources manager in those agencies, because a lot of stuff sometimes just doesn't get published. How did I get to work for USAID? My father had nothing to do with it. I got a phone call from the Army Corps of Engineers back at the Department of Defense in Washington, D.C., the Pentagon. And they said, Mark, do you mind if we recommend you to help out during our invasion in Iraq? And I said, hell no. And that's how I got a job with USAID as the senior advisor for all of the infrastructure, renovation, refurbishment, and reconstruction. And they kept extending my contract as a contractor. I loved it. I really loved it because I could see what was being done and that it was leaving this world a little bit better than when I came into it. There are desk jobs. I call them cubicle farms out there. But USAID is just really great. You've got to have open eyes, open ears, open everything. I loved it. I miss it to hell. I really do. You're being taught at IBEI, which is just amazing. And this is a compliment. I noted that between the universities I attended earlier and then IBEI is that the method of instruction these days seems to be based pretty much on theory. And I would ask my professors during classroom studies, teaching, how does this theory compare with this? And I'd get it would be difficult to respond to that. So that's why it just supported my field activity. Find out exactly what's going on in this locale. I'm looking at some of the names here, and I see some of you are perhaps Westerners. Diego Vallejo, probably Latino or Spanish, I don't know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It doesn't matter. But you know, the village or the neighborhood that you come from is different from the one right next door. You have different needs, different likes. That is all over the world. Every village is different in one way or another. Excuse me. So I recommend that. I really do. It's a good adventure. And I'm 73 years old. And I'm still adventurous due to that upbringing and that history of my life. And I can heartily recommend it to you all. I think we're time for QA, right? Question and answer. One mission director from a mission in overseas has a suggestion. Mark, you might want to insert the idea that you need a sense of adventure and tremendous adaptability. If you're a foreign service officer with USAID, she gives me how a guy started right out at the rock button and became a mission director for a staff of over 750 Americans and Pakistanis in the 1990s. Anyway, questions. I'm wide open. No question is dumb. Only me with the answers.
So thank you, Mark, for this very encouraging and vibrant presentation. I would like to let the participants know that their microphones are open. So if they wish to make a question, they just can unmute themselves and ask a question. I think that Diego, if you want to ask a question, you can start. Yes, go ahead, please.
Yeah, hi. Hi, Juan Carlos. Hi, Mark. Thank you so much for your words. It was very insightful. I wanted to ask actually something because, well, this was a kind of interesting moment for me because I recently applied to a Pathways internship at USAID. I know that your experience within going in USAID was particularly different, as you mentioned before, but either way, if I don't know if you have any insight into how what do you think USAID would expect from an intern in this particular time, or what are the I don't know, like the internal underpinnings or anything that you can help out with would be great.
Protocol, but it's all a throw of the dice. You're from Colombia, I recall, correct?
No, I'm from Colombia.
I'm sorry. Wait a minute. Where are you? Oh, there you are. No,
yeah,
Diego.
Unfortunately, yes. Sorry. Unfortunately, yeah. Unfortunately, there's no cameras for us because of this data protection situation. So I'm talking, but I'm here. Yeah, I'm Diego. I'm from Chicago actually. So I'm an American citizen. And yeah, I applied to this Pathways position. So I asked just these questions.
How do you get a job with USAID? Start out by going to USAID's Human Resources page. I would certainly start there. I would read The Economist and the Financial Times, which was my Bible. Growing up, literally, I would get ideas from there and I would see a need somewhere and then I would try to figure out who could meet those needs. I would suggest touching base with Peace Corps because they will hire you. And you'll spend 2 years out in the wilds, out in the field primarily. And if you can get a good recommendation from Peace Corps, they all have contacts. There's a lot of USAID senior staff that work for Peace Corps. I did for a short term to support them. Like I said before, 2 of my colleagues got jobs with Peace Corps, Puerto Rican, and another fellow from, I think, Oregon. Regardless, and they got Peace Corps jobs, and immediately after that went to work for USAID in various positions. You'll have to pass an initial security clearance, but there are various levels of security clearance. And unless you've been committed a felony and stuff like that, and you've got a bad record, it'll be tough to get a security clearance. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, that's great, actually. Thank you. But I was, well, yeah, it was, I actually did go to the human resources, and I'm actually also active with Peace Corps. Like, I think I will apply to maybe some voluntary position, but I also applied to like a pathways internship. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Yep.
Yeah. So I applied to that, and I don't know if you have any insight on how the process goes from the inside, or what do they expect from applicants as pathways interns or something.
Okay. There are 2 websites. One is DevEx, which you probably already know about, devex.com, and reliefweb.com. I like those 2 websites because they advertise for contractors, both NGO and private sector organizations. Chemonics is the largest contractor for USAID, but USAID is just tired of having beltway bandits take all of their money. So they're going with local and NGO type people because they're more economical and they get the jobs done better. They don't have high overhead costs. I think Chemonics, last time I looked a few years back, their overhead cost was 42% of any contract. So I would go to those websites, and from those websites expand it further, and you'll find a company that's interested in you.
Okay, I see. Great. Thank you so much.
And feel free to email me or call me if you have any more questions or need some guidance.
Great, I will do.
I'm a mentor for eBay, by the way.
Nice. Thank you so much. Yeah, that did help out. I will be in contact then.
All righty, great.
Great. So more questions or comments? Oh, yes, I have Jacob. So.
Hello, yes. Thank you for the talk. I was really excited whenever I saw this come over my email. I'm a student at eBay, but instead in the International Security Program. And so I'm actually considering writing about stabilization, which is rolled into reconstruction programs for the U.S. government, especially for the U.S. Army. And so it was interesting to see. I had already read about water programs in Iraq following the invasion, as well as PRTs in Iraq and then Afghanistan. Do you have any experience that you had with the provincial reconstruction teams? And also, could you speak a little bit more to the their interactions that you had rather with the military and country there, and any improvements that you think could be made? It's interesting seeing this, especially with the government moving on with the Global Fragility Act, and I'm interested in seeing what the government might actually take as lessons, or possibly not take as lessons from the aftermath of those experiences. Thank you.
I think what I'm going to tell you will surprise the hell out of you. Pardon my French. CIVMIL, C-I-V-M-I-L, Civil Military Cooperation. I started it back in 2003 in Iraq. General Corelli, who was the commander of all the forces in Iraq at the outset there, and I met in a mess hall somewhere, and I sat down, didn't know who he was. He introduced himself, me too, and we started brainstorming. And I said, my biggest problem is getting out into the field. And USAID is telling me it's too dangerous. Our security people say I shouldn't go. That was with IEDs and assassination attempts, etc. He says, look, I've got Blackhawks and I've got Cobras. I'll be more than happy to help you get out in the field and see what's going on. Yes, he did have an accent. I flew all over Iraq. I had actually traveled in Iraq extensively when I was in the oil and gas business. And I knew the country well, and I knew the culture, and I spoke almost fluent Arabic. But I got around the country with some of my office folks who were adventurous like me, and we learned so much with that. One day, he came to my office, General Corelli, and said, hey, look, we're having trouble getting into, oh, golly Moses. There was a neighborhood that was controlled by a mullah, a radical mullah. And it starts with an S, and I just can't remember it right off now. But it was part of my repertoire where he said, we've been trying to win hearts and minds and interact with the local populace in this big neighborhood because they're all trying to kill us. And I said, well, you know what they don't have is water, clean drinking water. It's been cut off. USAID can go in there with its contractors and reinstall water supplies, and you guys can take the credit for it. And that should keep them at bay. Well, guess what? A short story is they were allowed into the country and into that neighborhood, and they were protected by the local residents. And the bad guys had to leave the country because they couldn't fight the hearts and minds of the local inhabitants who needed drinking water. Another good example of CivMil did the same thing in Afghanistan. And so a couple of my former USAID colleagues have worked for companies that teach military folks how to collaborate with civilians and actually win hearts and minds. If you want to email me later on with a question about CivMil, I could probably put you in touch with a couple of friends. Or if you Google DOD, Department of Defense, CivMil operations or something like that, you'll find out more about it. And just check Google again for CivMil operations, and it might show up. But Karen Walsh is a lady that owned her own company doing CivMil training at various sports around the country in the USA. So there is quite a big move on growing the value. It's already a value already to have CivMil on your side. You take care of each other. It's synergistic. Hope that answered your question, I think.
Thank you. Absolutely, yes, yes.
Great. Thank you, Mark. More questions or comments you would like to make to Mark? Okay, I have one question. When I was listening, I mean, all your experience, Mark, and which is fascinating. Something that comes to mind when we are speaking about, becoming, working in the development sector is how to, as you were mentioning, how to win the minds and hearts of the populations or the people that you are working with. I don't know if there is like some strategies that you use, especially taking into consideration. That you were working as an officer of USAID, an agency of the U.S. government in various parts of the world with very different cultural backgrounds, historical relationships with the U.S. So I don't know if, I mean, if you took into consideration this part and how, I mean, what strategies do you use to actually, yeah, go on the terrain?
I've always been an adventurer. At the age of 2 weeks, my parents, I was born in the States, my parents went back to Saipan where they were working, and I had a great nanny, a local nanny, and she used to take me to the beach, and I started to learn to swim. And I liked sharks because they always came up to me and nudged me, and I learned to swim with sharks. That was an adventure, and it just happens automatically. There is no clear-cut path to doing good. At age 20, my mom died, and I visited her before she died in Paris at the American hospital there. And her last words to me were, "Leave this world a little bit better than when you came into it." And I didn't know what the hell she meant. I thought it was helping a blind lady with her groceries across the street. It's a longer story, but I won't get into it. Somehow, at age 40, 20 years later, working with USAID and small villages and others in need, it hit me. And then when the results of the work that I did with my team started getting published, then I really saw it. So you have to be open to everything. And the adventure will creep up if your eyes are open and your ears and you see a need. Like, I see a need, that red cord around your neck with your name tag on it is distracting. Get rid of it. It's the way my brain works. Just joking. I like it, actually. I want one.
Excellent. Thank you, Mark. So, questions, comments? Okay, if you allow me, like, building on what you just said, in your experience, did you encounter resistance from local communities to the work that you were doing? And if you did, I mean, how you managed those situations?
You had to approach the potential beneficiaries or ongoing beneficiaries that this is their project. You needed to create ownership and sustainability. I worked with colleagues who never left their office, yet they had tens of millions of dollars that they were spending out in the field and never visited those projects or the beneficiaries. That was about 20 years ago, 15 years ago. And these guys were PhDs, and they were not comfortable out in the field. They had books stacked up in their offices, which I don't think they ever referred to, unless you ask them a question. Well, let me see here. Well, what's the weather like in the village that you're doing the reparations? Oh, I don't know. Let me check Google. It's field work. And I think you and I discussed this a long time ago about Wells Fargo Bank. And when the presidents and operating officers told their cashiers to get more credit card sales to the clients. And when the clients were saying, "Go to hell, I don't want a credit card," they forged membership with these credit cards. And it was the cashiers that made the money for the bank. But who got fired when Wells Fargo got caught doing these illegal, fraudulent activities? It was the cashiers, even though the vice presidents and everybody else. That is kind of a historical thing that happens worldwide, where it's the little Joe, Jose Pequeño, gets the blame. In Iraq, recipients need to want it, need to see that it is needed, that it will better their lives and their children's. Farmers in Afghanistan loved it when I got them away from poppies and to growing other pomegranates, which they could get a lot of money from. And what did they do with the extra money? They sent their children to the University of Kabul. They wanted it, and they stayed with pomegranates or whatever. It's buying a used car, for example. When you go to a used car sales lot and you start kicking tires, one car will stand out and you will buy it. And if it needs an oil change, you thought it had the oil change, but it needed it, you go back to the seller and you say, can you help me with this? And he'll say, sure. And I changed a lot of oil. So it's establishing relationships and knowing the local culture, cultural needs, and the local culture itself. It's simple, at least for me, getting out in the field. I hope I didn't scare too many of you away from seeking this kind of work, but it's just amazing. It's just, I miss it. I miss it tremendously. I got into trouble more with my colleagues at USAID, although I kept them informed with daily reports and everything else. Those were based on my field notes, going out in the field. And I tried to invite them to go out. Oh, I'm too busy. I'm playing golf tomorrow or whatever. I liked them a lot, and they were the team, but they just didn't know what I was, they couldn't relate to how I did business. You look at the guys that started Microsoft in a garage, 2 guys, and look where they brought it to. Elon Musk, and you know all the others. That's how it gets done. So anyway, sorry.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Now we have Shirley. She would like to make a question. So Shirley, the floor is yours.
Hi, yes, thank you so much, Mark, for the presentation. I'm glad to hear this emphasis on ownership and having and localization. And I was wondering, aside from this positive language in development, what do you think can be improved? One thing you think can be improved in this area of work?
I like how Peace Corps basically tortures its staff at the beginning by placing them out in wild country. In Guyana, I had a volunteer who was in her 60s from New Jersey who just loved every minute of it. And she lived in a small village. And she had a room of her own, but in the house of a family of, I think, 8 or 9 people. I think getting exposed to that kind of an introduction into development, humanitarian assistance, it's pretty strong, but it gets you out into the field, because when you go to an office in the Ronald Reagan building in Washington, D.C., you'll be surrounded by a cube farm of people that only go out for lunch or coffee. And you will miss being out in the field to find out what the hell is going on. What have we planned? What are our needs? What are the needs for the areas that you're managing or overseeing? So I think, again, my friends at USAID said adventurous, and open. And if you can either adapt or you already have adapted to that kind of behavior, culture, no problem. But that's not to say that USAID doesn't have its contract managers who manage all the contracts, accountants, auditors, etc. I mean, it's a wonderful organization to work for. Does that help?
Yes, thank you very much.
You bet.
Thank you very much, Mark. So, final questions, comments you wish to make to Mark? No, I think that I think that we don't have any more. So, Mark, yes, Mark, go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, please feel free. You can share my name, my email address, whatever, or check with your mentoring office there, and they can put out how to get in touch with me as well.
Absolutely. You can write to me an email, and I will share Mark's details if you want to contact him. So I think that it's on. I think that is on the invitation. In any case, I write my email right here. So you all have it. So you want to write to me, and I can share with you all the contact details for Mark.
Very good.
Mark, thank you so much for such a vibrant and interesting discussion about your experiences. It has been, I think, we all agree, it has been fascinating, has been extremely useful. We thank you again for sharing with us in this afternoon.
Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Morning for you, and I wish everyone a nice evening here in Barcelona. And Mark, a very nice afternoon to you in Mexico.
See you later. Ciao.
Ciao. Thank you very much.